so glad you're fighting for freedom of religion as you have since we first met. And I'm so pleased to see you again here today. Pastor, I'd like to thank you for your hospitality in this church, which I've driven by 1,000 times as I grew up in Springbank, but I never came into it. What a great way to be welcomed into the church. Of course, Tim of the ECP Centre, Craig Chandler's here, nice to see you, and everybody else. I'd like to say thanks, and thanks for welcoming me here. I'd like to start by telling you a boring story that leads to a more interesting story. On February 13th, 2006, I did the same thing I had done every week for years. I published a magazine. That's what I did. I published a magazine with the news stories that I thought would be interesting. And back in February of 2006, one of the most interesting stories around the world was the fact that some cartoons, some Danish cartoons of the Muslim prophet Muhammad had caused riots in parts of the Muslim world. In fact, over 100 people were killed in Nigeria and Syria and Iran. And cartoon violence, which until that point in time meant Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote throwing anvils at each other, cartoon violence all of a sudden meant death and destruction because of cartoons that most rioters had not even seen. Well, I thought this was an obvious news story. I knew it was. But as we came close to publication date, I realized that our little magazine, the Western Standard, would become the only magazine or TV station or newspaper in Canada to show what all the fuss was about. Now, I can understand if you're in the radio business, you have to paint a mental picture with words, but if you have a printing press or a TV station, why wouldn't you show the central artifact of the news? It seemed to me to be the job of a newsman, and I thought what we were doing was boring. Well, it wasn't boring to a lot of people. We were the only magazine in the country to do it, and thankfully in Canada there were no riots in response. In fact, all that happened was a great debate. And in our pages of the magazine, we ran letters pro and con our decision to publish those cartoons. Muslims were for it or against it. One Muslim woman named Rawa Khalid wrote that she didn't cross the sea to escape from what she called an Islamic hellhole to have Sharia law follow her across the sea. We had other people disagree, saying that portraying their prophet was in a graven image was insulting and blasphemous. We had a great debate. But one fella didn't want to join that debate. He didn't write a letter to the editor. I actually did debate him on the radio. His name was Syed Sohrawardy, a local radical imam born in Pakistan, schooled in the madrasas, does the Saudi lecture circuit. I debated him the morning we were rolling off the press. He hadn't even seen the magazine yet. They were still up at the printers. And we debated whether or not I should run the cartoons, and he disagreed with me. Fine, we went our separate ways. I do a lot of these debates, but he had never debated an infidel and been so offended before, so he went straight to the Calgary Police Service and demanded that they arrest me. They were very polite to him. He's a newcomer. Okay, fine, he's been here 20 years. And they said, we don't solve our problems that way. If I was in Saudi Arabia, where the Quran is the Constitution, I'm sure he would have had satisfaction from the police. But in Calgary, he was told that's not how we do it. They even wrote him a letter explaining why. They didn't even bother me with a phone call. I was impressed by that. But Syed Sohrawardy, this radical imam, shopped his grievance around town until he found the one group so illiberal that they seized it and ran with it. And that group is a government agency paid for by taxpayers of all stripes called the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And they seized this complaint. A secular agency seized his complaint and filed it. And lodged it with me, and I saw this complaint, and I read his complaints, chicken scratched, and he cited the law. What law did he cite to have the Human Rights Commission come after me? Not passages from any act of Queen Elizabeth's. He cited verses from the Quran. He cited Quranic law in his filings with the government agency, and they took it and ran with it. And for 900 days, I was prosecuted by a secular government agency, 15 government bureaucrats and lawyers, 500,000 taxpayers' dollars, prosecuting an Islamic fatwa. It was the first case of blasphemy prosecuted in English Canada in nearly 90 years. We're used to the phrase separation of church and state, aren't we? If someone complains that the Da Vinci Code is against Catholics, if someone complains about, well, any time a Christian is depicted on TV, we're told, mind your own business. If you don't like it, change the channel, separation of church and state. But what about the separation of mosque and state? Had a pastor or a priest gone to the same Human Rights Commission and complained about, let's say, Calgary's gay magazines, and cited as his law not anything of Queen Elizabeth's, but rather Leviticus, we know he would have been laughed out of that Human Rights Commission and the subject of ridicule in the newspaper. But when a Muslim imam did it, he was humored for 900 days and $500,000 worth of taxpayers' expense.